Sick of the bickering? We've got the solution. Thoughtful talk about the issues that matter in our community. Fresh Take with Josh Duclos. Be a part of the show by calling 281-1150 or email freshtake1150@gmail.com. Now, from the Myron Construction Studio, here's Josh Duclos.
And welcome back to Fresh Take. Glad to have you with us this morning. We've got our good friend Michael Ellis with us as well. And this hour of Fresh Take is brought to you by Hooper Law Office. Call Peter Harbach and Sarah Kahns at 1-800-794-5548. Hooper Law Office, providing a pathway to your legacy. Of course, it's 10 o'clock on a Thursday, and it's our favorite hour of the week. Mike Ellis is back. Welcome back, Michael.
Well, it's great to be here, guy.
Yeah, we'll get you a little closer there, get you all mic'd up. This is a main topic we've been talking about in the 9 o'clock hour. Now, Mike, you were listening to the 9 o'clock hour a little bit.
Yes.
That was nice of you. Thanks.
Yes.
Do you usually listen?
Only if you're mentioning my name.
Okay, so then we'll make sure we give you those notices before we give you your plugs. The TIF districts that are proposed in the city of Appleton, one on the east end of downtown around the Bluff site, one on the west end of downtown around the Thompson Community Center.
Yep.
So these are both being proposed, could be approved rather quickly. Thoughts on those specifically or on TIF generally?
Excuse me a minute. In the late 1970s, around 78 or 9,
78,
we started with the TIF. I was involved in it. It was a clean, simple process. It morphed over the last 30 years in many ways to a mess. If I lived in Appleton today, I would like to know, before they approve this new TIF on the Bluffs, who do they have on the dotted line? What is it that they're going to build? What is the assessed value of that district now? What will be the assessed value of the district when the TIF experience expires?
Right.
Going in blind and saying, well, we hope to, is sort of an emasculation of the law that we passed. They should have an idea. In other words, that's a beautiful site. If they want to build a library there, and this is important because there's been some controversy.
That's right.
I've had calls on this at home.
You have?
Yeah. And so I had a nice long discussion with legal counsel from the Legislative Reference Bureau yesterday.
They're like the legislators' lawyers.
They are our lawyers, and I get away with it because most of them don't know I retired.
I was going to say, I like how you still say our lawyers.
Well,
yeah, right.
You've got to understand, when I was there, I was very quiet. Most people didn't even know I was there. and here's the deal on that.
Right.
If the city of Appleton has ownership of a new structure called the Appleton Public Library, it cannot be included in the TIF.
Right.
Because Chapter 66, 10615, whatever it is.
66.1105.
Well, I was close.
Yeah, you were.
All right. That prohibits that.
Right.
Now, if Josh Duclos LLC wants to build a multi-faceted 8-story building there and wants to say to the city, I will include in my new building that I am paying taxes on.
Right, private development.
A private development. If they want to include the first 3 floors will be a library, which we will lease back to the city of Appleton, and you will pay us, let's say $140,000 a year to lease that space.
As rent.
Yeah. Then the ownership of that facility falls within the purview of a TIF.
Right.
Because it's owned by a private entity, and they can do that. So for the people that think this is a dodge around it, no, it is not. It was in the basic law when we started.
So that notion of having a public entity renting space from a private development in a TIF district, that was part of the original creation idea?
Yeah.
So one of my listeners wrote me and said that he felt like that's a double dip against the taxpayers because they're paying through the TIF to subsidize the development in the first place. Now they're paying through lease to pay off the borrowing that built the building.
Yeah, well,
No?
Come on. That's pretty much somebody who doesn't want it, and they're stretching the banana way across the street. The fact of the matter is, whatever the tax in the base year, and you were right on the money on this, whatever that tax generated into the city of Appleton, to include the school district, to include the technical college, to include the county tax, along with the city tax, that base tax, if it was $1 million, that $1 million will continue to flow to the general fund of those four entities. Now, when that building is done, if it generates $3 million, and they have and they're paying off whatever fiscal contributions that the taxpayers have injected into it, then all $3 million, when it is paid off, will generate to the denominator when you pay your property taxes.
Right.
And for the people, if the city of Appleton spends $2 and they have a tax base of 4 1,000ths of value, you divide the 4 into the 2, and you will have a tax rate of 50 cents per 1,000 of value. Now, while this TIF is going on, that doesn't change. The denominator is constant. The denominator is your tax base. The numerator is the degree of spending. So if you're going to spend $2 and you have a tax base of 4, each of those 1,000ths of value, will 4 into 2 gives you 0.5, which is 50 cents per thousand. When we get done, if they can contain their numerator, the spending,
Right.
the 4 will become an 8. And 8 into that will give you a tax rate of 25 cents per thousand. So everybody benefits if the TIF is done correctly.
Right. And this was what I was saying throughout the hour, is that if you're using it right, it's good. It can be a helpful tool in growing tax base and keeping property tax bills in check as long as the spending doesn't get out of control and the districts are successful. Now, from the state perspective, it's the expansion in the permitted types and places of use that's also a major concern. That you've got rural communities, literally townships, unincorporated municipalities
that's new,
that are
though.
used. It is
Yeah,
just in the past few years.
No, last year.
Was it okay? Just that recently. So you weren't there for that specific change?
No.
Okay, but you were there when you were adding and subtracting from districts
From all
and
that
revising
other
plans.
stuff.
Yeah, that 2005
Yeah,
reform.
yeah.
And you were on the fence about some of these
Oh,
reforms?
absolutely. I don't think you should be able to transfer a dumb TIF.
Right, a failing TIF,
A failing
distressed
one
TIF,
that you
yeah.
didn't think through. This thing in Appleton can be a really blessing to the taxpayers, because remember what I said in simplistic terms. If Appleton spends $2 per $2,
Right.
and they have a tax base of 4, you're going to pay 50 cents on each one of your value of 1,000. And with this new project, if it's done right, you could literally cut the rate per thousand in half, because you have expanded your denominator.
The tax base itself, but that benefit only comes once the TIF district is closed.
And that's
at the end of the life of the district, right?
And that goes back to sloppy deals, in which originally you had to have it done within 10 years. 10 years was it. And then they made changes, and then they made more changes. And then if you've got one that's just rotting on the vine, remember, while it's rotting on the vine, it is still paying in the same amount of money it did prior to the creation. You never lose your tax base year revenue. You never lose that.
Right. That's a great explanation. You're hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. Mike Ellis was there.
Watch that horse's stuff.
Well, hey.
Oh, you said mouth.
Mouth.
Oh, okay.
Mouth. Yeah. The right end. The right end. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got a caller who wants to get in on this conversation about state debt and taxes. We'll come back. We'll get you on the show. If you want to be a part of the show, you could call too. 281-1150 is the number. 281-1150. Or outside the Fox Valley, use our TDS Metrocom toll-free line, 1-866-887-1150. You can email me, freshhtake1150@gmail.com, or tweet at me at Josh Duclo. We are also live streaming this hour of Fresh Take on WHBY.com and on Facebook. So find us there if you want to see what me and Mike are wearing today. That's where you could find it out. We'll come back with more conversations with former State Senator Mike Ellis right after this on Fresh Take. You're listening to WHBY. And welcome back to Fresh Take. I'm your host, Josh Duclo. We've got Mike Ellis with us this hour. We're taking your calls and emails. 281-1150 is the number. 281-1150. Email me at freshhtake1150@gmail.com. Had a caller during the break asking about Mike's explanation of the tax base growth, talking about the denominator and the numerator. The question being, has the denominator, that is overall tax base, grown faster than inflation? Yep. It's less a concern about whether it grows faster than inflation as whether it's growing faster than the rate of growth of spending. The numerator.
The numerator
right.
is, for those that don't remember their 8th grade math, and the numerator is above the line.
Right.
That's how much money they want to spend. The denominator below the line is your tax base that will generate the money.
And when you
in Wisconsin, because of cost controls put on schools, levy limits put on a municipal government, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
In other words, if you wanted to spend above, you had to have a referendum. We have suppressed the growth of the numerator, the top number.
Right.
And while we did that, the denominator, the growth in the tax base, expanded faster, much faster. So when you divided that 2 and 4, 2 stayed pretty much maybe 3, and the other number went from 4 to 9. And when you do the math on that, you've got a 27-cent tax rate.
So it's really keeping local property taxes in check by limiting the amount that spending can grow and incentivizing the growth of tax base.
Exactly.
Yep, and so it's keeping
That's
it in
it.
check. All right,
That's it.
So there's our math lesson for the day. We've got Rick on the line calling from Oshkosh. Rick, thanks for holding on through the break. What's your question for Senator Ellis?
Good morning. Great program, Mike and Duke. Just asking about the administration. This is according to the news media, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is what they are telling us, is that during this administration, they plan to bring back $8 billion to the tax, or return $8 billion to the taxpayer. And if that's true, we still have a $4 billion debt, and it's still growing according to the Blue Book. Could you correct me if I'm wrong on that?
Yeah, a couple things. The $8 billion number that you're talking about is not in this budget alone. The $8 billion is Walker's statement in 2015 that at that point in time he had reduced taxes by something like $4.8 billion, and then we had the 15-17 budget, and at that point he said that would grow to $6 billion in tax cuts. And now with this budget, when you add to what Walker has done since 2011 through 2019, in the budget we've got today, when you put it all together, PolitiFact has rated that statement true. He has reduced taxes $8 billion, but it's over an 8-year period, and about $1.4 billion is in this budget. So that's number one. It's not $8 billion property or a tax cut right now. It's over the course of 2011 through 2019. And if you read your Milwaukee Journal today or your Post-Crescent, which is like a poor sibling of the Milwaukee Journal, because all they do is print the Milwaukee Journal junk and stick it in their local paper, which is a joke. And then if you read that story, that'll give you an explanation of what I've just said. Now, the second part of your question, would you repeat that?
That we're still in the Blue Book, according to the Blue Book, the $4 billion debt not deficit, but debt,
Yeah.
and it's growing.
Yeah.
And what we'd like to know, and because this was, and naturally politics is politics, but they were saying that we're broke because of the $4 billion debt. Now this is what campaigners were running on.
Yeah.
But are we still broke?
No, we're not broke. We're going to end this budget, the year that just ended. We have about $263 million in what's called the rainy day fund. Under Wisconsin law, the budget that ended June 30th. Now, we're supposed to have a new budget right now, but we do not have one yet, as you know. But when we close the books on June 30th, we are projecting $265 million in the rainy day fund. Now, the rainy day fund, any surplus money at the end of a budget cycle above $65 million, the law requires that when we get done, we subtract. If we had $100 million in our closing balance to wipe out the last 2 years, $65 million of that by law is pulled out as a safety net for any emergency. That would leave us with a closing balance of $35 million. Now, when you have more than $65 million in that closing balance, that money moves over to what's called the rainy day fund. And that money can only be used for emergencies in the future if 2/3 of both houses vote to do that. And you have to remember, that rainy day fund is one-time money. So if they wanted to take that $4 billion, now the $4 billion deficit, debt,
Right.
that is spread out depending on when they sold the bond issue. It could be 20-year bonds. So, that's a cumulative number, and you have to go back and look at when those debts were incurred, and half of that debt is in the highway fund, just to start with. The other major contributor to the borrowing is the University of Wisconsin system. If you pull the borrowing from the university and the highways out of it, we'd be just about zeroed out, because we don't borrow money to pay for shared revenue to the towns, cities, and villages. They get $975 million every budget year from the state to hold property taxes down. So I want to make it clear, the $8 billion is a cumulative number over 3 budgets.
Rick, thank you so much for that phone call. And Mike, thank you for bringing so much clarity to these complicated budget topics. It's hard to know when words like debt and deficit and savings and tax cuts and spending are all thrown around. It's hard to keep track of the bouncing ball sometimes. You do a great job of clarifying that for us, so thank you.
One of my advisors went to high school with me, David Heller.
Yes.
He lives in Appleton.
Okay.
And we had a class reunion last night. And if he bought me a beer, I said I'd mention his name.
Well, there we go. Check. Done. We're going to talk more about state budget after the break. We're also going to talk about the new candidates for governor, at least one who's officially announced that he'll be running to challenge incumbent Republican Scott Walker. We'll talk about budget, governor race, and anything else you want to talk about with Mike Ellis after this. Don't go away. More Fresh Take to come on WHBY. Welcome back to Fresh Take, this hour brought to you by Hooper Law Office. Find them in Appleton, Green Bay, or Oshkosh, or find them online at hooperlawoffice.com. Hooper Law Office, providing a pathway to your legacy. We've got Michael Ellis with us here this hour. We're taking your calls at 281-1150. Any question you've got about state government, the budget, elections, whatever's on your mind, Michael's happy to weigh in. 281-1150 is the number, or you can email me, freshhtake1150@gmail.com. We're also streaming this hour live on Facebook and on WHBY.com, so tune in and you can see the radio you're listening to. Mike, we want to talk about state budget. And frankly, as you mentioned, we're overdue. Our 2017-2019 biennial state budget was supposed to be signed by June 30th.
July
1st. Is when the fiscal year started.
Yep.
It doesn't do a government shutdown or anything, but we are overdue for our new budget. We had someone asking about debt. I want to ask you, too, you got some comments you want to share about our overall level of GO debt, the general obligation bonding, that is the debt that is not related to highways.
Well, some of it is, but it's paid for from the general fund. The general fund is $17 billion a year. 9 of that billion comes from the income tax. $6 billion comes from the 5% sales tax. And then there's 11 other items. So that's the money that we have available from the taxpayers that funds schools, which get close to $6 billion a year. Then we have another billion, that 975 goes out to local government. And the corrections is now pushing $1.2 billion, and the university is $1.3 billion. When you throw that together, those 4 areas make up about 90% of our state budget. If this budget that they put before us today passes as is.
This is the governor's budget as proposed.
Then in the next year, our general obligation bond debt, principal and interest, is $998 million. So when you've got revenue streams that get you to 15 or 16 billion, you can peel $998 million out of that immediately to pay for GO bonds. In the second year, remember, Walker wanted to borrow $500 million, but not all of that $500 million was going to be paid for by the highway fund. Some of it was going to be paid by the general obligation bond route. That number will cross $1 billion in the second year. So having said that, if they don't control borrowing, they are eating up our reoccurring revenue, of which, as I mentioned, $6 billion goes to K-12 education, $1 billion to corrections, $1.3 billion goes to university, and so on and so forth. So it's very important that they get a handle on this borrowing. Now, there's nothing wrong with borrowing, but it should be tied, if it's a highway necessitated bond issue, they shouldn't be taking money out of the general fund.
Right. Yeah, when it's a highway project, it should be paid for with highway revenues in the transportation fund.
And not only that, we went through the other cycle. Doyle was governor for 8 years, and during those 8 years, he stripped $1.276 billion out of the highway fund, and he moved it over to the general fund because we were in that recession, the collapse of 7 and 8 and 9. And then what he did, he went back to the bank and simply borrowed the money and put it into the highway fund. So right now we're at about 19 cents on the dollar of gas tax money is going to debt. And if this budget passes the way it is, it's going to jump to 23 cents. And that's eating us alive from inside out.
And we could talk about budget shenanigans from the past for a whole nother hour. Let's focus on the attempts to get a new budget passed. We haven't heard a lot, actually, from legislative leaders. Senator Fitzgerald in the Senate, Speaker Robin Voss, Majority Leader Steineke, Governor Walker. We haven't been hearing a lot from folks this week. Is that a good sign? Does that mean maybe they're finally behind the scenes getting stuff done?
Yeah, maybe. But it's also a question of we are full of ourselves. Okay? The same thing happened to the Democrats in 2009 to 11. They went nuts. Hell, excuse me. That was Josh that said the word hell.
My fault.
They went nuts. They even taxed the little old lady down the street who was helping out the other little old lady, made her join a union. They lost the whole thing. The Republicans have too many people who want to be governor, and so they're taking their own governor on, and they're creating a situation that makes us look, the Republicans, and I'm a Republican conservative moderate sometimes, independent all the time.
Right.
The fact is the Republicans are shooting themselves in both cheeks of their anatomy. At the time they're doing this, the Democrats can sit back and laugh. These people better realize you're not going to be in the majority forever. Take a look at what Doyle and the Dems did in 2009. In 2 years, they lost the Senate, the Democrats lost the Assembly, and they lost the governorship. So look in the mirror, Republicans. You're not that good right now. Clean up your act.
And we see this conflict between Republicans. Absolutely, Mike. We've seen this for months now playing out, where they can't seem to get on the same page. The dispute appears at least now to be narrowing in on this question, as we've been talking about, of debt related to borrowing for highway funding.
That's right.
Among other minor things. But it's mostly about what level of debt the Senate and the Assembly would be comfortable with, while also trying to observe the red line Governor Walker laid out about no new taxes without offsetting cuts.
Yeah, well, you know.
So how do they square that circle?
Look we've settled the K-12 thing. Thank God for that.
Right.
We have 870,000 kids in the public school system. We have about 125,000 in non-public settings. All right. And finally, Walker did the right thing when he wanted to give them $639 million more over the next 2 years. And he didn't put it in the fractured equalization aid formula, which needs to be overhauled. And if they want my help, I'll do it. The fact of the matter is, we have settled. I think we're going to get pretty much what Walker proposed. And most people in the education community agree with what he is doing. $200 more per kid in the first year. They'll get that again, plus a new $200 in the second year. We are also going to jill up the low spending district below $9,100 is the cap now. They're going to raise that to $9,200 and $9,300, and they can exceed the revenue control up to that new number. And all of that is good. That's done. So all they got left to do is two things. Clean up their act on the highways and look out for that rotten makeup last amendment of the budget 999. Do not allow people to stick individual pork that only benefits their own little backyard just to buy their vote. If these Republicans are going to blackmail the other Republicans, they should look in the mirror, because they'll be back in the minority in 2 years.
Yeah, and Mike, you speak from experience on this. You've been on both sides, majority and minority, in your many years in the legislature. You know how this works, the back and forth. It's a natural cycle. And typically when you lose your majority, it's not necessarily because the other side came up with some great idea. It's because you've overreached. You've gone too far.
Throughout the 90s and into 2003, 2005, heck, I think I was the majority leader 4 times. Tim Cullen was the majority of the Democrat, my friend from Janesville. He was the majority leader for, I mean, come on, life doesn't bestow upon you eternity in terms of being in power. So you ought to recognize from the mistakes that they made, and don't you keep making them. And as for the highway fund, for God's sake, a penny on the gas tax isn't going to break anybody. 2 cents isn't going to send them to the poorhouse. It's the people's highways. Why are they so afraid of fixing our roads? You know why? Because Walker shot his big mouth off and said, I will not raise taxes. Okay, good. God bless you, Scott. But the fact of the matter is, our highways are going to heck. I said heck.
There we go. See, you've got the clean mouth. I'm the one causing problems over here. The question on this highway fund, trying to get this cleaned up, Governor Walker saying he doesn't want to increase taxes. Instead, he said, we are going to ask the federal government for $340 million. We've heard this is from a special sort of leftover fund that always gets distributed at the end of a budget year. In the past, Wisconsin has gotten about $34 million.
Yeah.
This year, Governor Walker thinks we could get $340 million in order to fill some of that hole and eliminate some of the borrowing in the road fund. Is that just dreaming? Is that just total nonsense?
I had a dream the other night. I woke up and I actually had my own hair. Okay? I looked around the room, and my God, I thought I had grown a new head of hair. Now, if Walker thinks he's going to get $330 million, I think I'll hang on to my hairpiece.
Yeah. So, Mike, we have covered much of the budget. Many of my questions on the budget we could do a whole nother hour on this. We do want to talk, though, about the upcoming governor's race, because we've got somebody who threw their hat into the ring, Andy Gronick, a businessman from the Wisconsin area, some other Democrats who have mentioned possibly being interested. We're going to get your take on the state of that race when we come back. If you've got questions, we want to hear from you as well. 281-1150 is the number, or email me, freshtake1150@gmail.com. Back with more with Mike Ellis right after this. Trust me, last segment, you don't want to miss it. Back with more on WHBY. And welcome back to Fresh Take. I'm your host, Josh Duclo. This is Cedarwell from Sheboygan, another one of the bands that will be featured and has in the past played at Mile of Music. This is their song called One Man. You can hear them not only at Mile 5 coming up August 3rd through the 6th, but you can find Cedarwell on the Homebrew Station, our online station from the Rockin' Apple, WAPL 105.7. They've got a homebrew station. You can hear all kinds of local artists and Mile of Music featured artists on there. And start planning your trip to Mile 5. Again, August 3rd through the 6th in downtown Appleton. We have Mike Ellis here with us in studio, and we're also streaming this hour live, so you can catch this last segment on Facebook or on WHBY.com. Now, we've got some questions here from Ed, but we've got Larry on the line. We want to get to Larry's question first. Larry, thanks so much for calling. What's on your mind?
Hi, Josh. Thank you very much for letting me talk to you.
Sure.
And Mike Ellis, you are a fresh breath of air to listen to you because you speak your mind. I know you're not in government anymore, but it's really great to hear you. But
Thank you.
My comment is, how long can this country continue running up debt like we are, like $20 trillion? Can we continue this? Or
No.
Yeah. Good question, Larry. This notion of debt at the state level and the federal level is something that's reaching really kind of a critical point here. We've approached a national debt that's over 100% of GDP, which seems rather unsustainable to me. Mike, what do you think about that?
They can't, and they're going to have to. They're going to have to make some drastic decisions. Most of the debt, the trillions, are tied to entitlements. And nobody, because we've evolved into the entitlement. Back in the 30s, they came in with Social Security. That money was supposed to be sequestered. It was not supposed to be used for anything other than, to pay out Social Security. Then we entered the second phase of entitlement, and it's not really an entitlement because they're taking it off your paycheck every payday. Then we came in to the Medicare element to help senior citizens. And then we morphed into the third element, Medicaid, to help poor, economically challenged people to be able to get health care. And when you throw those three items, and the Social Security thing really shouldn't even be in there. They never should have stole the money in the first place. And both parties have stolen it and kept putting IOUs in. When you throw all of that together, something's going to break, and we cannot continue on this path. And that means an awful lot of people are going to have to make the right decision going forward for their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren. This may mean when they're done that they get beat, that they lose their seat, and they haven't sucked up to every darn special interest group who wants more of our money. They may get beat. But in getting beat, they can look down the road from heaven someday and say, my grandchild is living in a good, sound fiscal setting.
Yeah,
and if they don't do that, this country is going to go bankrupt.
And many states are experiencing this already, one just south of us.
Take a look at Illinois.
Exactly. Dramatic increases in taxes, dramatic cuts in spending, and what it's going to do is hollow out the tax base of that state. Well, and there's really an unsustainable path that they're on.
Well,
still.
Illinois is $15 billion in the hole. I got to watch what I say. They're $15 billion. They just raised taxes $5 billion. And because we have reciprocity with Illinois, the taxes are going to go up on Wisconsin residents who work and pay their taxes in Wisconsin, but they're going to be based on Illinois. We have to shift $51 million out of Wisconsin to Illinois under the reciprocity. So that's getting into the fog skipping.
Yeah. With the few minutes we've got left, though, I get some great emails from a listener named Ed. He writes fantastic questions for me to ask my guests. He suggests great guests. Ed, I am so grateful for your contributions to this show. Thank you so much. I can't get to all of your wonderful questions today. I promise we will carve out one of Mike's visits just to handicap and recap the governor's race, to set it up and talk about who's going to run and evaluate all the candidates. Once we get the state budget out of the way, then we can move on to the politics of 2018, which are still a year and a half away. Yeah. But given it was in the news this week, I do want to get your initial thoughts, Mike, on the latest announced candidate, Andy Gronick, entrepreneur and businessman from the Milwaukee area, wants to run as a Democrat to take on Scott Walker. Yeah. What do you think?
I think the Democrats are going to have the same problem the Republicans have as it relates to getting rid of Tammy Baldwin. Tammy Baldwin has flaws, but everybody knows her, and whether you like her or don't like her, they know who she is. She's there. And on the other side, Scott Walker, whether you like him or don't like him, he's there. Baldwin and Walker have something in common. They have great name identification, and recent polls pretty much mirror where we've always been. Gronick they don't own a bicycle company.
Right.
Okay? And I'm not knocking the guy. God bless him. If he wants to run, he should run. But the fact of the matter is, Baldwin has a huge edge on whoever these no-names Republicans are running against her. Walker has a huge edge on the no-names running as a Democrat. So Gronick and about 7 other people have the same problem that the Republican candidates for the U.S. Senate have.
Now, with Gronick specifically, he is going to try and leverage his lack of public service experience, his lack of government experience, to run as the outsider who can come in and fix things. This was the message that we heard from candidate Donald Trump, who then became president. Is there an appetite in the state for a non-politician to come in and take over as governor? And do you think that makes Governor Walker vulnerable?
I don't think it makes Walker vulnerable, but I will say Trump came in, an outsider. He hasn't made any mistakes. He hasn't put his foot in his mouth. He hasn't gone nuts tweeting. He hasn't had a family that's stacked in his inner circle. I mean, he's done everything right. Why are you laughing
You'll
at
notice
me?
the sarcasm that I'm hoping is coming through the airwaves here.
There's a little sarcasm there, folks.
And this is it, is we're seeing that there may be an appetite for these unconventional candidates, but when they get in, they're not always as smooth an operator as we might hope they would be.
Well, here. I know we're running out of time. 47% of the voting public in Wisconsin hates Walker's guts. All right?
I hear from many of them.
Yeah. All right. And they're all Democrats. For the most part.
For the most part, yep.
47% of the people think Walker can walk on water. They're Republicans. The key to all 3 of his victories is the 7 or 8% of the people that are independents who are not dogmatic conservatives or dogmatic liberals. They're going to decide this election. Walker beat Barrett twice. 53.8 to 47, 54 to 46, and then he had Mary Burke in the second go-around, and he beat her by about the same number. So, Tammy Baldwin beat Tommy Thompson, and Tommy was pretty popular, but Tommy's problem was the same that Russ Feingold had. They were big names at one time, but they left the stage too long. So my advice to Gronick and the other ones, God bless you for wanting to do it. And I think right now, Baldwin and Walker probably are going to win.
There we go. 18 months before the election, Mike providing his predictions already. We will certainly get more into this. Once the state budget is resolved, we'll talk the issues that will define these races. We'll get more into the candidates themselves. I love the questions that I'm getting from you and the phone calls for Mike. Mike enjoys this. I bet you can tell as it comes through the microphone every week. Make sure you're tuning in. Send me your questions, your suggestions, your topics that you want to hear about. I love hearing from you. Keep it coming at freshtake1150@gmail.com. I'm off tomorrow. Representative John Mako will be filling in as guest host, so make sure you tune in for that, and have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.